In today's food-abundant but deeply food-insecure world, is feeding leftover food to left-behind people really the best we can do? What kind of solution is this? Certainly, the moral imperative to feed hungry people is universal. Distributing surplus and wasted food to millions of hungry people, food banking enjoys huge public legitimacy. Yet in 2021, the UN reports global hunger continues to rise. What alternative solutions are there? This podcast focuses on food waste as part of our Corporatization of Hunger series, and it's my great pleasure to speak with UK national food waste expert and campaigner Martin Bowman from the British food waste advocacy organisation This Is Rubbish. Welcome to Rights Not Charity. This podcast series is about a big idea, ensuring everyone has enough food, not as a charitable gift, but as a fundamental human right. My name is Graham Riches. I'm a retired social policy professor from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. This Is Rubbish's Plenty to Share campaign has just released 3 short animated videos focused on inequality and the causes of food waste, food poverty and inequality and solutions to them. Martin, welcome to Rights Not Charity.
Hi Graham, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us, so let's get started. As a seasoned food waste campaigner, what led you to this innovative illustrated explainer video approach? What's important about this kind of visual messaging? What are you hoping to achieve by it?
So we wanted to start telling a different story about how we can solve these problems, the root causes of food waste and poverty. We show how inequalities of wealth and power in the industrial food system generate waste and hunger more often than not. Waste and hunger will ultimately continue unless we fix these inequalities. Charities are only a sticking plaster solution to food insecurity. What we're really saying with this campaign is that redistributing surplus food is also only a sticking plaster for food waste issues too. So to see what the more systemic solutions to food waste are, we need to look at the root causes. And to do this, we need to rewrite the dominant story of how our food system generates food waste. So let's look back at the history of this. Food waste as an issue has taken off really over the last decade in the UK and globally, and a fairly standard story has begun to emerge. Food waste primarily happens at the retail and consumer level in rich industrialized countries, and it's down to individual failings of consumers to be solved with education campaigns to change that behavior. Now, on the other hand, we have food loss, which makes it sound unintentional, like it's been sort of lost down the back of the sofa. But it's actually food wasted in supply chains, problem for lower income countries who lack infrastructure like storage and refrigeration, and apparently have inefficient supply chains. But the problem with this narrative is that by accident or design, this narrative falsely implies that industrialized food supply chains in rich countries are effectively efficient and low waste. And to solve food waste in these countries, it's enough to leave it to voluntary commitments by companies. So market innovation will solve food waste. And there might be some role for social enterprises and charities to hoover up the leftovers. So in this system, we need to modernize the supply chain of countries in the global south to make them more efficient and emulate these systems. But this apparently depolitical approach to food waste becomes sort of ascendant, has gone largely unchallenged, but is in fact deeply neoliberal. So that is the assumption that businesses in the free market are fundamentally efficient, and any problems are usually down to the personality failings of individual consumers or perhaps state intervention. So with these films and other resources, we basically aim to rewrite this narrative, to explain how actually the inequalities of wealth and power that occur in the industrial food system generate waste. They generate overproduction, price crashes, inflexibility over seasonal variations, and rejecting food for being of the wrong size and shape. But not only that, it also distributes wealth and food extremely unequally, so generating mass hunger despite there being no shortage of food or wealth to go round. And it creates underdevelopment. The lack of storage infrastructure in the global south is not a coincidence. It's the result of generations of colonial exploitation, which continues in a slightly different form today, with multinational corporations often extracting huge amounts of money and resources from the world's poorest countries. Understanding all this means that we need more systemic solutions than just taking food waste and giving it to people in poverty or voluntary commitments by businesses. We need to design food waste and poverty out of the system in the first place. And we sketch out some of these solutions in the videos. Now, all of this is a more complex story to tell than just volunteers rescuing lots of food waste for people in need. So with these animations, what we've tried to do is make this new narrative more accessible. And we've really created these videos for activists wanting to help reframe this conversation, communicate about the root causes and the deeper solutions to food waste and poverty.
Thank you so much, Martin, for showing so clearly that food waste is a product of a dysfunctional industrial food system and no guarantor of food security for the poor. In that context, what policy and practice successes has the UK Plenty to Share campaign had to date in reducing food waste and food poverty? And what kind of challenges are you facing? What do you think are the lessons to be learned?
We're a tiny organisation, so we pretty quickly realised that if we want to win the kind of change we want to see, it's not going to be an overnight thing. So we decided we need to take the time to build a strong movement behind these systemic solutions and involve whoever we can. Our focus has really been on getting people used to our new way of framing the problems of food waste and poverty and building a movement to advocate for systemic solutions. We put together a document called the Food Abundance and Equality Declaration, which now has over 40 organisational signatories, mainly based in the UK, but including Rights Not Charity, including environmental campaign groups like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, also anti-hunger advocacy groups like Feeding Britain, and I think really importantly, some of the UK's largest networks of food aid and redistribution. So IFAN, the Independent Food Aid Network, which is the UK's second largest network of food aid providers, groups like Food Cycle and the Real Junk Food Project and others. The declaration states that food redistribution is only a sticking plaster solution to food waste and poverty, and we need these more systemic solutions like regulating food businesses to reduce waste, fairer pay, tax justice, and providing strong social safety nets. And we got the launch of this declaration into the Big Issue magazine, which is fantastic. It's one of the world's most widely circulated Greek newspapers. So we see sort of signing the declaration as a first step to recognising this new way of framing the issue. And we've started encouraging signatories to get more involved in specific campaigns for systemic solutions and feel more confident to speak out about solutions beyond their bread and butter of food redistribution. We've seen some great collaborations emerging out of this already. So a great example is the CEO of surplus food sharing app Olio recently joined Tax Justice UK's campaigning for the UK to back Biden's proposals to clamp down on global tax evasion. And as we're also conscious we don't have all the answers, we've tried to give a platform to and amplify the campaigns of the declaration signatories. For instance, we've joined up with social justice activists and amplified their call for a real living wage and stronger social safety nets. In the UK, the biggest opportunity at the moment is opposing the cuts to universal credit, which is the UK's current main system of welfare payments. But in the longer term, we'd like to advocate for things like a minimum income guarantee, a form of universal basic income, so that social safety net is really strong and people don't have to rely on charity to survive. And we're also campaigning for systemic solutions to food waste on the other side of things. We would like to see food waste regulation and to make it compulsory for food businesses to report on and halve their food waste by 2030. We'd like to see unfair trading practices legislation to protect suppliers from food waste being transferred onto them by their suppliers. And finally, creating a fairer food system rooted in greater food sovereignty. So we're hoping to hold an event in Parliament to give these voices a platform in front of policymakers. In terms, you asked about challenges. So far, we've been surprised by how difficult it's been to get media cut through with the project. So far, it's unfortunately been that supermarket press release is more important for them to publish than the big civil society movements. But the reward of the project has really been seeing a grassroots movement beginning to build. And ultimately, I think taking the time to build that and set down root is the most important thing.
There's a huge amount to think about there. And I think one of the things that strikes me very much is the way you're repoliticizing the issues of food waste and food poverty. It's not just a matter for charity. The declaration that you've launched is certainly proving to be a significant tool fostering active, joined-up food, environmental, and income-based social justice, civil society collaborations, if that's not too much of a mouthful. But it's looking at creatively developing systemic solutions to food poverty and waste. I think this is really very significant. And I also find that your comments about the media certainly ring a bell here in Canada, where the CBC, our publicly tax-paid broadcaster, has been actively promoting food bank drives and food bank donations, which makes it somewhat difficult for them to report objectively on these matters. So in that light, I'm particularly interested in this Rubbishes campaign to disentangle solutions to food waste from quick fixes or remedies to food poverty, using food banks as the kind of transnational and national corporate go-betweens. But at the same time, what practical role do you see food banks playing in advocating for the right to food?
It's a great question, and this has really been at the centre of this campaign. So we see it as absolutely essential that we get food banks and food redistribution charities to be at the forefront of struggles for things like a right to food, a greater wealth equality, and food waste regulation. The media reaction to food insecurity is dominated by food banks. They're the most visually obvious and filmable manifestation of food insecurity. So they often appear in coverage and become influential spokespeople on food insecurity to the media and policymakers. They get a lot of attention. So if they call out government policies, it gets reported. And governments are often keen to use food charities as a so-called moral release valve. In the UK, when former Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservative government gave up a substantial part of its responsibility to end poverty through brutal cuts to welfare spending, asked for the big society, aka volunteers and charities, to pick up the pieces. This was exactly what was going on. And photo opportunity with some food bank volunteers. Puff pieces about food bank volunteers are more popular with the media as well. It's a simpler story for them to tell. And often newspapers in the UK been involved in campaigns to expand food redistribution. For instance, I remember receiving a Big Society award for my own food redistribution work. Just arrived in the post one day, and I remember feeling so angry and ashamed at this kind of lazy co-option, as it was clear that they hadn't researched what the group I was part of was doing about its back history. So it's a lot more difficult, though, to do this co-option if food redistribution organisations are actively saying, no, food charity cannot be the long-term solution to the problem. We want you to do this instead. We've collaborated a lot with the Independent Food Aid Network, IFAN, the UK's second largest network of food banks, and they're fantastic at putting this message front and centre that we want a future without the need for food banks. We want to do ourselves out of the job, essentially. And they're consistently raising pressure on the government to provide adequate financial assistance to people in poverty long before our campaign started. The Trussell Trust, too, the UK's largest network of food banks, have been increasingly vocal about this as well. In contrast, there are some surplus food redistribution organisations that have focused entirely on pushing an expansion of food redistribution and strengthening government government funding and corporate ties to achieve this. And we hope to change that and change the culture of these organisations so that they'll join in with the movement. And that's the kind of movement that Plenty to Share hopes to create. Ultimately, people in food charities should be our allies. We shouldn't be seeing them as the enemy. Ultimately, the people working in them want an end to food waste and poverty. And indeed, some of the earliest examples of food redistribution in the US grew out of public outrage of the existence of huge crop surpluses occurring alongside mass hunger in the Great Depression. And the foundation of the earliest food banks in the 1960s grew partly out of concern over food waste. Following the 2008 crash, it's been an understandable reaction to the raising awareness of food waste, coupled with seeing the devastating impact of austerity policies, that many people have decided to take matters into their own hands and set up charities to redistribute food to compensate for these failures of government. I must say, I was involved in these kind of movements for a decade. For instance, I helped set up the Gleaning Network in the UK, which is a group which harvests leftover crops from farms for charity. And I helped organise a chapter of Food Not Problems in London to build the consciousness of why we need rights, not charity, and to help build the confidence of these groups to speak out in favour of systemic solutions. So to do this, Plenty to Share have tried to focus on the things that unite food aid groups, an acknowledgement that they don't want to be the long-term solution to food waste and poverty. Our focus has really been getting them involved in campaigns for those longer-term solutions. We use that as a bridge to help encourage them to do more policy advocacy. Simultaneously, alongside that, we have tried to educate people about the limitations of food banks. The most important thing is uniting people around these long-term policies, which ultimately stop food waste arising in the first place and remove the need for food charities.
That's excellent. If you're inspired by what you've heard today, please check out our other podcasts and keep up to date with the Global Solidarity Alliance for Food, Health and Social Justice by visiting rightsnotcharity.org. The Alliance is an international research, education and advocacy effort. You can find a transcript of today's discussion at rightsnotcharity.org/podcasts. This is Graham Riches with Martin Bowman.